Fillin' holes, fillin'. Fillin' holes, fillin'. You made some dice, but they weren't quite full, and so they left little air bubbles. So we're gonna take some UV resin and fill them. I have this UV resin that's clear, and I'm going to cure it with a UV light. These holes are small enough that I don't have to actually suck up the resin into the pipette. I'm just going to dip it in and then let it drip into the hole and then cure it. And it's okay that you have a little bit of a bubble over what you have filled, and that's going to get cut down later and just sanded, and the UV resin will sand really easily, so it doesn't take a whole lot of sanding. You usually get these holes when you fill in your mold and it seems like it's full, even you have resin in the reservoir to get pushed in, but once you put it in the pressure pot, there's just a bubble in there that doesn't quite escape or get filled, and so you have these holes and you're like, man, those are my favorite dice. I have to fix them so I can use them. And it's really not that difficult. I'm just going to put it on the tip because it's on the corner, and this is a rounded corner, so I'm going to try to just leave some excess to make kind of a bubble tip on it. Now the D6 has a bigger hole, so I'm going to actually suck a little bit into the pipette and squirt it back out into that hole. And I'm going to hold it because it goes across the edge that I'm going to fill it so that it will hold. Kind of like when you put water droplets on a penny and have it just kind of bulge over. That's what I'm going to do with the side of this dice, because then I can shave it down with the craft knife and then sand it to shape. This last one is probably the easiest. I just barely dab it in there and it fills it up pretty much perfect. There's not going to be a whole lot of sanding at all going on that one. Now I'm going to use the craft knife to just shave that little bulge down as flat as I can against the face so that I don't have to sand as much. Although you don't have to go too far because the resin will sand pretty easy. You also want to be careful when you're shaving this that you don't accidentally pop it back out of the hole, which happens quite a bit. If it does happen, that's okay. You just start over and do it again. Just fill it and use the UV light to cure it. It only takes a few minutes. Now this one, as I'm shaving down, I get closer, I do actually pop it out of that hole. And you'll be able to see the white around the outside that it's already popped out. So I'm just going to take my craft knife, get underneath that edge, and just pop it out the rest of the way. And we get to redo that. This one must also have something wrong with the mold, whether it's torn inside or something that it just leaves these goobers on the face, not just that sprue that I shaved off, but you can see on the face there's these other imperfections that I'm going to shave down and sand to make it a good smooth surface, along with my tip that has the hole in it. And on the last one, I popped that one out on accident while I was cutting off the sprue, so I got to redo that one also. Then we take our sanding and polishing paper and go ahead and sand those faces back smooth until we can't see that anymore. This one has a little cut or a divot in it as well that you could go back and fill with more resin, or you can sand it down until it's gone. I just sanded it down until the hole was good, just so that you could see that where the hole is filled, that it looks okay. Once your filling is sanded down smooth, then you can just go ahead and do it for a little bit on each of the other papers to polish it down and get a good smooth glass-like surface. And that looks pretty good. I'm also going to sand the edges on this one because they're flat edges, they're not rounded. So I'm going to sand those as well, and it will look great. And usable, which is what we're going for, because we want to save those dice that we spent so much time creating. And there it is, and it looks pretty good. It's that corner right there that was repaired. You almost can't tell unless you look really, really close. We're going to do the same thing to the rest of them. A little bit different for the D8 and the D6 where the filling is over the edge or the corner. The way we're going to sand it is going to be a little bit different. We're going to go ahead and get our face so that it looks pretty good. And then once that face looks good enough, when we go to do the corner, we're going to kind of do like a rounding just over the tip gently so that we can get that corner to be just as rounded and smooth as all the rest of them. And I do the same thing with the D6. I put the edge on the sandpaper and just kind of swipe it back and forth in a rounding motion so that it swipes across one face to the other face across that edge. And it looks good even though it's that big of a hole, and you can definitely tell that it's been filled, but it looks good and it's functional. So here's a quick look at our dice now that they're filled and ready to roll. After you paint them, of course. And that's fine and dandy and all, but what happens when your wife makes this really cool dice that she can't live without, and it's got a giant cavern for a hole in it? Then you have to use all your skills to fill that thing. So on this one you can tell the edges are still intact, the number is still barely intact underneath it, but there's a lot to fill. So I'm just gonna take the bottle and squeeze it in there and layer by layer cure it until it gets up to the top. If you can save this, you can save almost anything, as long as it still has the number and the face intact. If it doesn't, then you're pretty much out of luck, unless you want to really try to put it back into the mold exactly how it was and then refill it and do it that way, which at that point you're basically just making a whole new dice anyway, so you might as well just make a new one. This is the side that has the 1 in it, and so I'm just using the paper towel to soak up any resin that may have gotten into the 1 because I don't want to cover up the number. Still a pretty good sized cavern, so we're gonna keep filling. At this point it's pretty much flush with the face, and so anytime I try to fill it, it also fills in my number 1. So I have to get a little creative. And I have this putty laying around that I decide, hey, I can just take this putty, stick it in the number so that the number doesn't get filled, and then I don't have to worry about overflow, and I can make it overflow a little bit like I did in the other ones so that I can shave some off later. And I'm going to use the toothpick to help jab it in there so that it's just in the number not anywhere in the hole that goes right alongside it. And then I'll be able to pull that out once it's all cured, and then get the putty and everything else out once we get to the sanding portion. Then I pull out most of my putty, and then we can start with shaving it down with the craft knife and then sanding it smooth like all the rest. And this die has flat edges just like my others that I've designed, and so I will need to shave the edges and sand the edges as well. As we get closer, I use the craft knife to shave off the excess and to dig out the remaining putty. I'm not too worried about getting it all out. Anything that you don't get out, along with the resin that gets stuck in the number after sanding it, you can just use water with a little scrub brush or toothbrush and clean out the number. There's a little bit of a divot next to the number, so I'm just going to take some more UV resin and fill it in very carefully, not to get into that number. It just needs a tiny bit, and I'm going to use a toothpick to kind of dab it into that little tiny hole to make sure that it's covered, and then continue with the sanding. And surprisingly, it worked really well. I have successfully saved my wife's favorite dice that she made. She will be so happy, and I'm sure she'll never roll this one, so she won't have to see it very often anyway. But now you too can save your dice that you've made that have either minor to large holes in them using this very easy technique. Did you like this video? Well, prove it and click that thumbs up to show that you like it, and share it with all of your friends. And while you're at it, you might as well click the little bell and subscribe so that you can get notified every time that a new video comes out. Feeling generous? Become a patron on Patreon and share your ideas while getting discounts at 3DM Tabletop on dice, dice cases and towers, miniatures, apparel, DM tools, and more. Thanks for watching. Now go create your own awesomeness, and if you happen to make a mistake, go ahead and fix it.